Hello everybody, my name is Ethos, and this is Gaming with Spirit, doing another tutorial video for you. Again, really fast, really simple. So, in the last couple videos we've done, Warframes and weapons. We're going to get a little bit into reading weapons, Warframes, and modding. So, to some people, when they're playing through the game, they throw on mods for health, or for shields, or just for survivability, and that's fine. But as you start getting towards some of the higher level play, when enemies start getting above level 20, which I know sounds like a small level, but is pretty high, you start to think about how your Warframe's abilities are going to be best suited, and how your weapons are going to be best suited by the mods you put in them. So we're going to get started with Warframe mods. Now, with Warframe, I'm going to change into a Warframe that I don't really play that much, Zephyr. One of the few Warframes that I haven't mastered yet, just because I don't want to go through that last level. So with Zephyr, we'll go into configuration C. So you have 3 different configurations you can create for every Warframe, as a heads up, which means you can create 3 different ways of making your Warframe work, and you can select in between them from doing different matches. So let's say I want to do configuration A if I'm doing survival missions, or if I want to do configuration B just for defense missions, or configuration C for exterminates. You can do that for every Warframe, and it's very, very useful. And even for that, you can also name them different things to help you remember what you built. So all Warframes are going to have this kind of look to them. They're going to have the 2 rows of 4 like any weapon does. They're also going to have 2 on top, and then empty arcane slots, which the empty arcane slots we'll get into in a different video. But the top 2 and all the rest of it we will get into right now. So that top one on the left has a little circle symbol, and that means auras. And if you look down here, you'll see all, and then right next to it will be auras. Auras pop up from time to time on alert missions, and what they're good for is drag and dropping, and if you watch over here, I have a capacity of 58. It increases the capacity of my Warframe by 1, because it doesn't match the slot, which I'll get to in a minute. So when you put one of these in here, the best idea for any slot in a Warframe is to match that symbol. So if it's a D slot, or a Vizarin, you put a D in there. Now I don't think now normally you can't easily find auras. You have to look at the symbols that are right here, because this is gonna be the easiest. So physique, for example, matches. See, it turns green. So that's gonna give me 4, even though it only has a 2 capacity, which means it's doubling its own capacity. Some Warframes don't have a slot here. They don't have they don't have a symbol. So they are kind of give you whatever they give you. But auras are really necessary to boost the abilities of what you have. Never, like this one's giving me 14, so now I'm up to 72 mod capacity. I can do a lot of stuff with this. But unlike this slot and the next one next to it, the Exilus needs to be unlocked. So an Exilus adapter can be acquired through Samaris, who's a Cephalon in the Tonneau Relays, which is a whole nother video as well. But if you open up those for 20 platinum, you have another slot that you put Exilus mods. And Exilus mods are once again noted by their little symbol that looks like a half gear with some arrows. Exilus mods, for the most part, are just for movement. Some of them can have additional effects like ability range, or aura power, or velocity, or max energy. Those are very useful, but they're also these ones right here, the drifts, are all what we call precept mods. They're something that comes from a special challenge that comes later in the game. So don't bank that you're going to have those in a heartbeat or right when you start the game, unless you're playing with someone who wants to boost you along. So the next thing you will see over here is this weird one called augments. Now augments, they go down here in these bottom 8, but augments change how a Warframe's ability is going to play out. Normally, you just put your regular Warframe things in there. So when you see you have a symbol, you'll go to the symbol down here and see if you have any mods that match it. If you do, it cuts the cost by half, but not a rounded up half. Not a rounded down half. It's rounded up half. So since this is going to cost me 11, it's going to cost me 6 here rather than 5.5, because 11 round up and round down. But if I put it in the wrong slot, it goes from adding 11 to being 14. So it increases the amount that it costs, which means you can still put it in that slot if you have the capacity. But it's better for you if you can make it match a slot. Now, some people will go, well, hold up. If you can, well, how do you get more of those symbols then? Because I want to have a Warframe that has an incredible amount of power. Warframes and weapons have this thing called an action down here. And actions are very useful. Now, you can also view the tutorial if you really want to, but actions let you do a couple different things. First, you can auto-install, and it will throw in a bunch of stuff and put an automatic aura on there. Usually, it's not the greatest build. Like, look at that. Why would I want that? But it throws on kind of a random assortment of stuff to play how the developers think the Warframe setup should be. It's not usually the best for everybody. The next thing is a mod capacity. Now, I have an Orokin reactor installed in my Zephyr, but if I didn't, this thing would have, I think, only like 31 mod capacity, or 30 mod capacity at tops. So, installing an Orokin reactor, or in the case of a weapon, it's called an Orokin catalyst, is very important if you like the weapon or the Warframe a lot. Like, if you're planning on getting rid of it, don't bother throwing a catalyst or a reactor in it, because catalysts and reactors only come very, very rarely from alert missions or from Twitch drops. And sometimes from data logins. But again, it's such a rare occurrence that unless you're constantly playing the game and have been playing it for a while, you're not going to have those resources. So don't try to put all the reactors and the catalysts straight into the weapons and the frames, because you're probably not going to benefit from them. The next thing it lets you do is polarize. Now, polarizing is when you have a max rank frame, and I'll show you using a max rank frame here. Like, for example, we'll do Zephyr Prime, which is a bit prettier. In Zephyr Prime, oops, not their abilities, upgrade.
Excellent armaments, operator.
I have this build.
Covered in blood.
But if I actions, so I can polarize this. Now, when I polarize, it shows me this layout. Now, I can change an existing polarity, or I can create a new polarity somewhere else, which is kind of a neat thing to be able to do. This allows you to reset, it resets the item to unranked, which means all Warframes and all weapons, even after they become maxed, will be reset to 0, and you have to redo it, but you'll have a new polarity slot, which will let you put more stuff on them, because it will reduce the capacity limits of the mod, or requirements of the mod. So it's a way that people create those really powerful builds where they're running in, they're one-shotting super bosses, and they're just tramping on enemies. They do it by polarizing their frame. But once again, unless you really like the frame and it fits your playstyle, don't do it. It's not worth the time. Because formas cost quite a bit of resources, and they're not hard to get when you're at my level, but they are kind of challenging to get when you're at a lower mastery rank or at a lower playtime. So focus more so on finding a Warframe that suits you, and less so on tweaking out every Warframe you get, until you get veteran status and you're like, I've been playing this for 4 years. Let's just make everything pretty. Then you can afford to do that. Now, the last thing it lets you do is also you can, two other things. You can swap polarity. So I can polarize, as long as I polarize my frame once, I can swap polarities from different slots. So I want my V symbol down over here, I can swap them. And then the V will be down here. That's not really super necessary for Warframes, but it is kind of necessary for weapons. And I'll explain that in a second. And the last thing you can do is you can put a focus lens on it. And focus lenses give you focus, which you acquire from doing bounty missions on Cetus. You'll pick them up occasionally and you can build them, or you just get them. Don't worry about focus until you've completed a certain level of the game called a War Within, or at least the I think it's the second dream is when you fully get this ability. So until then, don't worry about focus. Now that we've explained that, arcanes are something you get from raids much later in the game. So once again, don't worry too much about them. Now, we're going to go on to look at weapons, which are a little bit more important to pay attention to. So we're going to use a weapon that I've gotten level 30, but I really don't care too much about. Super Vandal. Okay. So we're gonna clear all these off. And it has these two V polarities. And we're going to look at, we're just going to put that so the stats are back. And so this is the base Supra Vandal. Some of you might go, okay, that's a still powerful weapon. Well, let's explain some of the statistics here. So a lot of people will look at this weapon and go, wow, I don't understand any of this stuff on the side here. Besides, maybe I understand what critical chance is. But accuracy, I don't really understand. Crit multiplier, maybe. Not really understanding fire rate. Magazine, I think I get. Noise, I think so. Let's break it down. So every weapon in the game has what's called IPS, which is impact, puncture, slash. So that's IPS is those 3 basic damage types. And I wouldn't say all weapons have it, but most do. Now, IPS are physical damages, and enemies have armor. That armor takes more damage from impact, maybe, for example, or less damage from puncture, or more damage from slash, but less damage from impact. So this weapon has a high puncture at 30. So if I'm fighting an enemy that is, for example, oh lord, I think the Infested, don't quote me on this, but I think the Infested have armor that reduce puncture damage. So you're doing 30 damage a hit with puncture, and it's doing maybe 5 to them because they take reduced damage from it. Now, that's not all there is to IPS. On top of that is your status chance. So statuses are important when you play with these damage types, because every time you hit someone with an attack, it rolls a dice. And if that dice comes up in your status percentage, then you apply a status effect. So with impact, the status effect is they go flying. They like koosh, and they go flying away. You're like, wow, that's kind of cool. So the higher your impact damage, the more chances that your status of impact will hit. So if you have a 400 impact, a 30 puncture, and a 6 slash, your impact is almost always guaranteed to be your status effect. I would say not all the time, but most likely. If you have the puncture one reduces the damage they deal by, I think it's like 30% or something like that. And slashes is true damage. When you hit with slash, it makes them bleed for a percentage of their for a percentage of their life. And that percentage is based on how much slash damage you have. Well, let me roll back. It's not a percentage of their life, it's just a flat amount based on your slash damage. So the more slash damage you have and you can cause it to proc, the more damage they're going to take and they're going to bleed out and die. Slash is what's called the end game damage type. When people are playing Warframe, they want slash damage on everything, because it kills everything fast. Now, can't talk. The less damage types you have, the better for your status chance. So if you just want to proc slash, and you can somehow get rid of impact and puncture, which currently is only possible through ribbon mods, which are a thing, but we'll get to that later, then you would have a higher chance of proccing slash if you get rid of those two. Like every time their status hits, you'll be hitting with slash rather than impact or puncture. So some people don't want to load up their weapon with a bunch of different status types. However, some do. So you'll find these mods like Hellfire, or Cryo Rounds, or Infected Clip, things like that. And these will give you heat and toxin, electrical. And if you notice, when I put heat up there and put electrical up there, it changed what kind of damage. It was no longer just heat, and it wasn't just electrical, it became radiation. This is what we call dual elemental damage, and it's not it's not like it's dealing both fire and lightning, it's dealing radiation. It's not fire and lightning, it's just doing radiation. Just so people understand that. And once again, just like with impact, puncture, and slash, some enemies have resistances to radiation, while they don't have resistance to heat, or they don't have resistances to electrical. And why it's important to remember about being able to change around slots is this. If I put Stormbringer here, and Fire here, and I put Infected Clip here, it becomes Toxin, Radiation. But if I swap Stormbringer and Infected Clip, it becomes Electricity and Gas. And that's because the top, starting from left, going to right, is priority. So if I move Storm up to there, it still stays the same, but if I swap it, that's when it changes and becomes Corrosive, Toxin, Electrical, then Fire. So when you're building a weapon and you want to have a high status chance, but you want to have certain combinations like corrosive and viral, you need to have them be in the correct sequence to be useful. Now, to kind of make a point here, if you do this setup and you want to also have more poison, and you say, oh, this one's different because you can't just keep putting the same kind of mods on there. You only can have one mod of each name. So I only can have one infected clip. I can only have one Stormbringer. But you see this one for Malignant Force, like, oh cool, I can put this one next to Hellfire and then get the combination of heat and poison together. No. Once you already have a combination, any additional of the one that makes the combination will add to that combination. So this Malignant Force is adding to my corrosive damage. Even though it's not over here, I can put it underneath, doesn't matter. Once a combination exists, once an element's been put on there through a mod, it adds to its combination, it doesn't create a new combination. Sadly true. So one thing to take away from this is the order of your mods in your weapons changes how your combinations happen. It's important to know that. Now, there's two types of weapons. You have critical weapons, and then you have status weapons. Now, status weapons are ones that have a 20 to 30% chance to status. Because if you work at it, you can get that status chance up quite a darn bit if you know what you're doing. So I don't think I have any more, which is kind of sad. I should have more of those. But you can get yourself up to a pretty good amount of status, and having that additional status effect is very useful. Multi-shot increases status, so we can do split chamber and that. So now up to 80%. 80% of the time when I shoot a shot and hit someone, it's proccing a status effect. Now that's because I have multi-shot, which creates more projectiles. Just at the point. Just remember that weapons that have that high status chance, you want to capitalize on that if you can. Well, weapons that have a high critical chance, you also want to capitalize. So I can get that to 40% with just one. And that means 40% of the time I'm critting for 2 times damage. But there are mods like Vital Strike that increase that multiplier to make it up to 4 times. And there's even higher, if you can go beyond 100% crit chance, there is actually that. You can do it. So some weapons have a nice balance. They can be a healthy balance between status weapons and crit weapons and be amazing. Some can only be one or the other. So it's important to look at your weapon and look at your mods and decide, is my weapon a status weapon or is my weapon a crit weapon? Because both are powerful in their own way. But capitalizing the strength of a weapon is more important than trying to make it something it's not. If this was a 1% chance to crit, there'd be no reason for me to put this on there. It would make it like a 2% or a 3% chance to crit. And that would be useless. I mean, 3% chance to crit is nothing. So don't bother with it. Now, on the other hand, Warframes are a whole different animal. They have duration, efficiency, range, and strength. And because I feel like this video can go a long time too, and I don't want it to, we're going to kind of scale back and just pay attention to the weapon stats right now. So I've explained to you how mods play together, how the elements combine, and how the priority is left to right, top to down. And then, of course, how slots function. So one of the things you look at is your fire rate and your magazine. So some weapons have like a 2 magazine, which means they have 2 shots at the reload. But then your reload speed is right here. That's 3 seconds. And yes, you can bring that down quite a bit. Now, fire rate is supposed to be the number of rounds per second or per 5 seconds that you can fire. So the higher that is, the more damage you can deal quicker. So that increases what's called the damage per second, or DPS. So once you have those 2 things in mind, you just know that your reload speed is important if your fire rate's high and your magazine size is low. If you have a high magazine size, you might not need a good reload speed. But if your magazine size is like a 3, you're going to want that high reload speed. Because you're going to otherwise be reloading every 3 seconds for 3 seconds. You're going to be like, oh my god, I'm going to die because I can't shoot my enemies back. So it's important to know what your magazine size is and what your reload speed is, because those 2 things work together. Your bigger magazines don't necessarily need a high reload speed or low reload speed because you want the lower ones, not the higher ones. But if you have a low reload speed and a high magazine size, you're gonna be just hitting things really fast, really hard, and never really have to worry about your downtime. Well, your fire rate is how often you're firing. So your damage can be 1,000,000 damage per second, but if you are only firing 1 shot every minute, you're not going to be doing as much as someone who's firing 300 rounds a second, and even if they're only doing 5 damage apiece. So it's something to remember is about playing to the weapon's strength. Some weapons, high fire rates, big magazine size, really high reload speeds. Then figure that out. Do you want to reduce that reload speed? Do you want to increase that fire rate to make it go down faster? Or do you just want to play with the crit chance if the crit chance is high, the status chance if the status chance is high? So looking at your weapons, primary, secondary, they're all the same. The only other thing you have to think about, and this is fall off, but fall off isn't super important unless you're playing in really big maps, is noise. If you want to be a stealthy guy, you can't use alarming noise weapons, but there is a solution. There is actually, and I don't know, there's suppress. There's a 25% chance enemies will hear reduced gunfire. So if you max that out, it will be 100% chance, which means that it will go from being alarming to silent. You can shoot anyone in the back of the head in stealth and they can never see you. It's one of the greatest things ever. But remember those 4 important facts about modding, especially when it comes to modding weapons. First, just play to the weapon's strengths. Some weapons are crit, some weapons are status, some are a balance, but they're one of those 3. Second, beyond playing to the weapon's strengths, look at what your reload and your magazine and your fire rate. Those 3 work towards each other. Your fire rate's really high and your magazine size is high, and your reload speed is super high, you might want to think about reducing that reload speed because you're going to need to cut that down a bit. Some weapons have what are called charge times, and charge time is reduced by reload speed. So if your reload speed is, super high, that's something else. If your reload speed is super high, then you're going to have, so speed trigger reduces. See, look, it goes from, so this speed trigger, its fire rate goes to 20 after 12. If I do the one that gives me reload speed, which is that, it goes down to 2.3. Now, in a weapon that does charging, like charge attacks, like a bow when you draw, you want to have that reload speed. If you look at it normally, so that's fire rate 2 times, sorry, I messed up. Fire rate decreases the amount of charge time something takes to charge up. That from bows to big blasty weapons, fire rate is what you want. But when it comes to reload speed, that reduces the amount of time it takes to reload your magazine. In some weapons, they only have 1 shot. 1 shot per magazine, then it's reload time, like bows. So reducing that reload speed is important. But it all comes back to playing with the strengths of the weapon. Remembering, and the third important thing to remember is how mods pair together. If you are going to have a status-based weapon with elemental mods, you need to think, okay, what statuses do I want to have? And then make sure your mods are in sequence so that you're not creating the wrong combinations. Because you can get rid of them and change them around when you do have the problem, but it's just easier to understand how they combine. So that will be everything for me today. I hope that you guys have enjoyed watching this video where it kind of explained how modding works, as well as touching on the fact of how elemental mods pair and the different actions you can take with everything. See, here's the catalyst. Remember, don't use the catalysts, don't use the reactors, and don't polarize a weapon that you aren't willing to put the time into. There's a lot of weapons out there. So if you really find this, you struggle with a weapon, don't bother to improve it beyond getting it to rank 30, because there's no reason to. If it doesn't fit your play style, don't play with it. Just level it up and call it good. But if you don't know how to build something, you don't know what weapons or mods you want to put in, just auto-install. It'll do it all for you. So until next time, everybody, remember those few simple tricks about how to mod weapons. And until next time, I will hope to see you guys in my until next time, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, rest of your month, rest of your year. Until then, I hope to see you guys in my next video. Bye-bye.